Hi, I'm Cheryl Kagan, very proud to be the senator for Gaithersburg and Rockville. Welcome to an episode of Kibbitzing with Kagan with a very special guest, Katie Curran O'Malley, Democratic candidate to be Maryland's next Attorney General. Katie, thank you so much for taking the time to chat.
Well, I'm excited to be kibitzing with you.
Thank you. So we're going to start. There are a lot of folks who know you and a lot of folks who don't. So I'm going to give you 60 seconds, literally on the clock, to just introduce yourself and give folks an idea of your background.
Thanks, Senator. So I grew up here in Maryland. I was raised in Baltimore City, and professionally, I've been a public service lawyer. But outside of my profession, the most important thing about me is that I'm a mother of 4 great kids, and I've been married to my husband for the past 31 years. But while raising my kids and being married, I've been a public service lawyer, first 10 years as an assistant state's attorney in Baltimore County, and then for the past 20 as a district court judge of Maryland, sitting primarily doing civil and criminal work. And so that's really where I've spent my lifetime career, has been in courtrooms and in Maryland's legal system.
That's great. You still have time.
Well, and I'm excited about running for Attorney General because the Attorney General leads 450 plus lawyers that actually do go to court pretty much every single day. Not all of them at the same time, of course, but in a variety of different ways. The Attorney General's office has lawyers that represent all Marylanders in a variety of issues with consumer protection, our environment, and public safety.
Okay. So were you a good student growing up?
I think I was. I was always very curious. I loved learning. I loved reading. And started off in the public schools, but then we moved and I went to a Catholic school and a Catholic high school, but then went to public universities.
Okay. What did you think you wanted to be when you were a little girl? What did you think you wanted to be when you grew up?
You know, I grew up around politics, as my father, from the time I was born, was a delegate, then a senator, then lieutenant governor, and then attorney general. So I was always around public service, and my mother was an artist. So, you know, I had her balance of the arts and my father's balance of the law. So I geared towards public service, though, more so than art, and used to go to court with my father when I was little, and certainly spent a lot of time in the Maryland legislature when he was a senator and then lieutenant governor, and helped him campaign from 1987 to 2007 when he was attorney general.
Well, let's just name him. We have to honor Joe Curran, who was really an extraordinary public servant. So talk about, you have a married name. Why don't you talk about your spouse?
So my husband is Martin O'Malley, and he's my chief consultant on my campaign because he's had a lot of experience starting back in his time growing up in Rockville in Montgomery County. Yes. He worked for county executive candidates and then worked for presidential candidates. And he was the field director for Barbara Mikulski after the Gary Hart campaign. And that's where I ran into him because I was helping my father get elected for the first time as Maryland's attorney general. So that's sort of how we met up on the campaign trail.
Great. And just to be clear, for anyone who just landed here from Mars, the name Martin O'Malley, he was the governor of Maryland and the mayor of Baltimore in the opposite order of that. Politics. Why are you a Democrat?
You know, it's interesting. I feel as though it's something that I guess is part of my DNA. And again, because I grew up in a family with Democrats, of course, that's what I was exposed to. But always, you know, from the time I guess I started becoming really aware of things politically, which was in high school, and having debates with people about, you know, taxes versus non-taxes and public school and private school and where money is going and getting spent, I always felt, you know, that I was always labeled a bleeding heart liberal, and I was proud of that. I'm like, well, I am. And I think because of the things that liberals stand for, which is equity and fairness, you know, and promoting all of those things, whether it's in education, whether it's in employment, whether it's in the law. I mean, these are things that I was brought up and appreciated as a child, and saw the civil rights legislation being argued when I was little. And, you know, my father was also a big proponent against the Vietnam War, which was not a popular stand, and then voted for Medicaid funding for abortion for women who were of lower income, which was also a very controversial stand back in the day. And he certainly didn't win any favors with the church. He's Catholic, and we were brought up Catholic. So it wasn't, you know, but he did it because it was the right thing to do. And so that's really what I've been exposed to.
That's great. So other than your dad and your husband, who is your political shero or hero, living or dead?
Hmm. I would have to say I'm a huge fan of Barbara Mikulski's because of all the trailblazing and work that she did, as well as Congresswoman Beverly Byron. I thought it was just a great trailblazer as well for men and women, both she and Barbara Mikulski. And then my own mother and my grandmother have always been instilling in me the independence that you need to have for your own career, always making sure that you continue your education. Both of them were so helpful to me growing up and making sure that I understood how important that was. And my mother started as a law student back in the 50s, and she didn't end up finishing. But when I got married to my husband and we were expecting our first daughter, I was in my last semester of law school, and she really made sure, she's like, you're not giving up, you're going to do this. So from politically as well as just professionally, my mom and grandmother were great support there.
That's great. So I have a bunch of questions about the law. So first, what is your favorite TV show about the law?
I guess, it's probably, the SUV show, what was it called? NYPD.
Okay.
But that started to get too gory and gross, so I had to stop watching it. So then I started watching more things like Sherlock Holmes with Benedict Cumberbatch because it was not as stressful,
There you go. There you go. At what age did you become? So that was a question I already had, but we kind of already covered that. You became interested at a pretty young age. When did you know you wanted to be a lawyer?
Right after I graduated from college, I took 3 years off. I worked in banking. I got my securities license with First National Bank that then was bought by Allied Irish, and I was working as a securities trader. And after my 3rd year of being in banking with international currency and then the security trading, I just felt like I didn't want to spend my life in banking. I felt like I wanted to give back more. So I started going to law school at night and stayed in the banking division for a bit, but then got hired by the state's attorney's office in Baltimore County, where I just loved it because I got to spend so much time in the courtroom watching great lawyers and great judges. And so that's what did it for me, becoming a lawyer and being in the courtrooms.
Yeah. What is one value that guides your work in the law?
Being prepared. That is the one thing, and I've always told lawyers that have come in front of me as a judge, you have to be prepared, and you have to be prepared to change course, because if you're not listening to the evidence, if you're not listening to what the witnesses are saying, you can miss some golden opportunities, and you can also ruin your case because you may think that it's going to go a certain way, but based on what happens with human nature, you can never tell. So always being prepared, but then making sure you know that you may not know where it's going to go. So listening to your witnesses and the evidence.
Great. What does an average person not know about the law that you can share briefly?
Well, it depends on what type of law we're talking about. And that's why it's so important when we're talking about our criminal justice system and we're talking about landlord-tenant rights, that individuals who come into court have access to services. And in the judiciary, we made sure that we had self-help centers for all parties. So we couldn't be, giving landlords or tenants just this information. It had to be both. When we're dealing with domestic violence victims, we had to make sure there was a nonprofit, not the judiciary, that was available to talk to the petitioners, because they sort of freeze up when they come into court. For me, it's where I live and breathe, but for normal citizens who come into a
terrifying.
Yeah. It is. Even if it's a speeding ticket, I've seen that. But certainly when it's an issue involving a sex offense or domestic violence, or landlord tenant and you're facing eviction, and where's your family going to live? People really needed those services. So as Attorney General, I would like to see that we have lawyers mandated to represent individuals in those situations.
Attorneys general sometimes take on an issue, a particular issue that is a sort of pet priority of theirs, in addition to the stuff that's customarily done. Is there anything that Marylanders would expect to see from an Attorney General O'Malley administration?
So I've worked a lot of my career in the area of domestic violence, starting as a prosecutor representing the victims, and then as a judge training judges all across our state and our country on best practices and what best practices to use in adjudicating those cases. Not being an advocate for one side or the other, but always looking at lethality issues, weapons, whether there's firearms involved, and how that heightens the lethality for witnesses that come to court or victims and their families. So that is something I'd like to work on statewide to make sure that first responders and state's attorney's office all across the board are using those tools that have been, actually, we have a wonderful woman here who's Dr. Jacqueline Campbell, who's been training, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and judges all across not just our country, but the world on best practices to use and making sure not only that we're keeping families safe, but how do we break the cycle of violence with the abuser? What services? Everybody's different. You can't just put, one person in a program and expect that to work for everybody.
Right.
So it's an area that I am very passionate about because I've seen deaths, I've seen children die as a result of it, and men and women in a lot of pain. So intimate partner violence is something I know quite a lot about and would certainly work with the state's attorneys across our great state to put an end to it.
Thank you. Consumer protection is its own division in the Attorney General's office. Any particular issues or priorities that you would have coming in?
So it is one of the biggest divisions in the AG's office, and Steve Sakamoto Wengel has been running it for many, many years, even when my
Steve
father
was a guest on this podcast. Folks,
Oh, great.
find that. Yes, sorry to interrupt.
No problem. I just saw him yesterday at Steve Sachs Memorial. So he's been doing a great job. All the lawyers have been doing a really good job in that division. They do small consumer matters, but they also take on some big issues like the opioid crisis. The tobacco litigation was a consumer protection issue. And I feel as though these gun manufacturers and gun sellers need to be held to certain standards when it comes to consumer protection. So it's an area that I would like to see our Attorney General, me as the Attorney General, and other attorneys general across the country start working on. There's a law that protects, a federal law that protects the gun manufacturers and the owners, the gun shop owners, from civil liability, but it has been pierced in using consumer protection laws. So that is something I'm very much interested in looking at so that we can stop the killing of our children and the killing of our, people in New York that die just going to the grocery store. It's just too much every single day.
Right. So perfect segue to my next question, which is, how would you decide if you were Attorney General when an issue or a case would be a Maryland case, and when you would collaborate with other attorneys general around the country? Because Attorney General Brian Frosh, who was just my podcast guest this week, has done a lot of both. How do you decide?
So I think you have to look at an issue, and let's say antitrust is one right now. So the big issue with antitrust laws and it's across the country is with big tech and how big tech is using data. And I believe it's the Nebraskan Attorney General, who's a Republican, who is also on the same page. So it's not a bipartisan issue. It's how is our information being used?
It is a bipartisan issue, is what you meant. It's not a partisan issue.
Yes, you're right.
Just wanted to clarify.
Thank you.
Okay, sure.
You're right. It's not partisan because we're all consumers, where all of our information is being used, and we don't know how it's being regulated. And it's like oil, the way that it used to be when Standard Oil was, violating so many and being monopolistic and violating so many antitrust laws. So we should all be able to work together across the country, like-minded attorneys general, on regulating how that is being used. But also, with the tobacco litigation, it was something that started out in Mississippi and then other states joined. And the more states that joined, because the issues were affecting all of their citizens, just like Marylanders, the more powerful the suit became, just like the opioid crisis.
Yes.
So those types of issues that affect us nationally would be where I would go to join in with other like-minded attorneys general.
Great. So let's pivot to the campaign. You are a first-time candidate. What do you like best and least about being on the campaign trail?
I like best going to events and talking to people and answering questions. I, find it's just much more fun. The Zoom's great, and it's been so helpful in getting across the state, but it's really great when you can go to an event and talk to people, shake hands, and really connect with them.
And least favorite?
Raising money. We did great. You know, we've raised a lot of money. It's 1.2 and we are still soaring. We have not let up. And we're on television. We were on television 10 days before my primary opponent. So we're doing really well for a first-time candidate. We're competitive.
Okay.
Not fun.
Right. You are not unique in that opinion. Which campaign endorsement are you proudest of and why?
Certainly Emily's list and getting the support of women across the country, because we just do not have enough women candidates. And right now, with the looming decision of Roe v. Wade looking like it will be overturned, women do not need any more men to talk about protecting our rights. We don't need to be protected. We need to be elected. And that is something that I say wherever I go. I'm just tired of hearing men say they want to protect us. We don't need that. And across the country, we need more women to be elected, and here in Maryland especially. So that's an issue that I talk about. And what was the question again? It was
the endorsement that you're proudest of.
Emily's list,
Yeah.
Barbara Mapelski, certainly the Washington Post. I mean, I can't put one in front of the other. And the League of Conservation Voters is coming out today. So they're endorsing the campaign and have gotten great.
Endorsing the campaign. They're endorsing
me. Yes.
the candidate.
Yes. Sound like my husband.
Women are terrible at that. I used to be terrible, but I was coached. So, okay.
My husband is always telling me they endorsed you, not the campaign. So you're right.
Exactly. I have to say, Westmore does that sometimes. We and the campaign is like, no, it's you. So, okay, we're going to pivot to something totally different, and let's pivot into letting folks know a little bit more about you. So, hobbies. What is your favorite sport to play or watch?
Well, my favorite sport to watch is soccer and rugby, because my son used to play that. So I really enjoyed watching it. But also on a professional level, it would be football.
Okay.
I think that's exciting and fun.
And do you play anything?
I run. I don't play any sports. I'm just a runner. Now I'm pretty much a walker.
Okay, I get it. Did you pick up a new hobby during COVID?
You know, I think I got the Peloton bike. So if that's a hobby, I guess you could say, but I actually went to work every day. So I didn't have time to do that. The courts stayed open for domestic violence and mental health issues.
Yeah, that's important. Okay. What is your favorite junk food?
Probably ice cream.
Okay. Any flavor?
Vanilla. I know it's boring, but.
That is boring. Okay. God forbid your house is on fire. Other than people and pets, what would you seek to save?
I don't think anything. I think people and pets would be it. And, everything else is replaceable, but I think just maybe run with my cell phone and get everybody out,
Okay. What was the best vacation you've ever taken? Where was it?
Probably it's when all of us are together. And right before my oldest daughter got married, we went away to Puerto Rico, just the whole family unit. And it was great because things were about to change. Your marriage is great, but the dynamic changes a bit. So, and then every summer we all get together for a week. So nice. That's great. But the last one where we were just all the same little unit was great.
Fabulous. Do you have a song or an anthem, something that lifts you up and inspires you?
Gosh, I love music. So, and I love kind of because of being married to an Irish musician, there's been a lot of Irish music that I've listened to. Generally like the Pogues, which some of their ballads are really fun to listen to, but I also love just regular pop music. So in the morning, one of my favorite things to do is just turn that on and drive to work and sing, because no one's in the car and they can't hear how horrible I sing.
What are your thoughts on social media? There's sort of good and evil to that. How do you judge it? And do you have a platform that you like best?
There is good and there is evil to it. And the way it affects children's mental health has really been something that we need to come together as a nation and work on. And I know Massachusetts Attorney General Maura Healey has started an investigation into Facebook and Instagram and all of these platforms to make sure what they're doing with our kids' information, how they are using that information, but also just the simple fact that when, you come home and if you're having issues at school and then you get on Facebook and you see you're not invited to a party, or something like that. I think it's so much. And, you and I didn't have to deal with that when we were growing up. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have the internet. So I think certainly there's benefits, but then the downside and just making sure, knowing that that's there and that is something that you kind of have to work with your kids for or about and talk with them about and talk through it, because that is one of the downsides, I think, and online bullying, of course.
Yep, agreed. Make a pitch, please, for a nonprofit organization that you support personally.
The House of Ruth. It's in Baltimore, and they do great work for men and women who are victims of intimate partner violence. And they always can use, volunteers. Before I became a judge, I used to do their hotline, where I would take calls from individuals if they had situations and they needed information on where to go. So I think that's a great organization. There are other domestic violence organizations across the state, though. I believe one is Second Chance in Baltimore County, and that's what I would ask for people to look into.
Black Lives Matter, the murders of Freddie Gray and George Floyd, how did that affect you personally or as a judge? Can you share just a brief story?
Sure. I mean, I'm a white woman, and certainly I have friends and colleagues that have children who are Black and brown, and just having them share their stories with me about how fearful they are. When the George Floyd decision came down, my administrative assistant just started crying, and we all hugged her because she said she's so afraid for her teenage son and daughter. And just having to have that conversation, one of the judges who has a son who was a swimmer had to travel early in the morning to Westminster from Baltimore City, and he had to have that conversation with him, like, this is what you do if you get pulled over in Westminster or Baltimore City. This is what you have to say to save your life. So one of my colleagues, who was a white woman, came in because she knows that I'm pretty liberal. And she said, so what do you think about Colin Kaepernick and taking a knee? And I just looked at her and said, you will never have to have that conversation with your kid. The conversations that so many of our friends and colleagues are having about how to stay alive in America. So it's something that, we watched a man die on television. Freddie Gray, we don't know what happened to him, but we do know he should never have died based on what he was charged with. And I believe that's what Wes Moore said when he was speaking to a bunch of judges. We know that all the facts and circumstances around how these people died, how these Black lives were lost, were all different, whether it was a search warrant in the middle of the night, whether it was, a stop for selling cigarettes or whatever it was. Each and every one of these incidents that were being investigated by the police should have never ended up in a death sentence. And so that's the conversation that the country is having now. And that means we have to go back and start having conversations about how we teach our kids about race and how we teach our kids about history and slavery. It doesn't mean that we're awful, evil white people now, but we really were then. And we need to reconcile that and make sure that we're doing everything we can so that is not something that continues, because we are seeing systemic racism in so many areas.
Agreed. Well said. I just have a few more questions. We're going to start to wrap up. Can you share, please, the best advice you've ever gotten from a mentor?
Okay, I think the best advice I ever got from my father, and again, both my mom and dad were great mentors, but he said, never get a credit card. And he was right. He said, never get a credit card.
And you don't have one?
I do have one, but he was right. I mean, it was like early on in my career. So he's like, don't get one. You don't want a credit card. I'm like, all right, but you need, that was because I was still in college. So he's like, don't get it.
In other words, don't go into debt, because it'll be hard to climb out of.
Correct. Yeah. Well, especially with campaigns, never go into debt over a campaign. He's always been really clear about that.
Right. Is there anything we haven't covered yet that you'd like to share briefly?
I guess just, the race right now, we have 27, 28 days left to go. I know, it's exciting. So I'm talking to voters about, certainly as Democrats, most of our platforms are similar whenever you're in a Democratic primary generally. But the thing that's different about my experience is that I've actually, for the past 30 years, been working in courtrooms, been working in the legal system, and have been dealing with real people and real problems. And that's something that's so necessary when you're talking about an attorney general. The past 4 attorney generals, beginning with Steve Sachs, Joe Curran, Doug Gansler, and our last great Brian Frosch, have all had extensive trial courtroom experience. I'm the only candidate in this race that has that. So I'm asking for people to look at that experience and look at the resumes and look at what the Washington Post is saying about this and what other endorsers are saying, and join my campaign and vote for me. And we can follow it all up with katieformd.com. If anyone's interested in looking at my website, we have a lot of information on there that we'd like to share.
Perfect. Thank you. And the last question, Katie Curran O'Malley, the question that I ask all of my podcast guests: what is your hidden secret superpower? What is a skill or talent that you have, something you're really good at that most folks can't do?
I think I'm really good at listening. I mean, it's a skill that you have to develop as certainly a lawyer, but also 20 years of listening to people day in and day out on the bench and making decisions and solving problems. I've always considered myself a problem solver. And that's only through listening to people to find out what the issues are and then how to address them.
Great. Well, Katie, thank you so much for taking time from your busy campaign schedule to kibitz this afternoon. I look forward to seeing you in person sometime before too long. Wish you all the best through Election Day and beyond.
Thanks, Senator. It was a lot of fun.
Take care. Bye-bye.